All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're so excited to be here with Clare Mackintosh, and she is the author of The Last Party, which is our book for January. And January, Clare, I don't know if you know, is our biggest month of the year because everybody's New Year's resolution is to do something new or go to book club. So
I love this. This makes me even more excited. Thank you.
So I'm going to read your bio, but then we're going to hear from you and hear how you got into this this incredible job that you have. I will call it a job. Clare Mackintosh is the multi-award-winning author of New York Times bestseller I Let You Go and Sunday Times bestseller I See You, Let Me Lie, and After the End, translated into 40 languages. Her books have sold more than 2 million copies worldwide and have spent a combined total of 50 weeks in the Sunday Times bestseller chart. Clare is a patron of the Silver Star Society, an Oxford-based charity which supports the work carried out in the John Radcliffe Hospital Silver Star unit, providing special care for mothers with medical complications during pregnancy. Clare lives in North Wales with her husband and their 3 children. Welcome. So Clare, how did this all come about? Start from day one.
Well, I was born, so what, like the writing or this particular book?
Yeah, no, the writing for sure. Like, how did you get this coveted career as this infamous author?
Well, I was a police officer. That's probably the best place to start. I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. Like I loved writing. I actually loved anything creative. So I danced 2-3 times a week. I did drama classes. I wanted to perform. And writing was something I really loved and I knew I was good at. But, you know, when you're young, you need role models, don't you? And if you don't see those people around you that do a particular job, it's quite hard to visualize yourself doing it. And I didn't know anyone who worked in the creative fields. Everyone I knew had jobs, you know, they worked in shops or offices, or they were doctors or teachers. So it didn't really cross my mind that I could be a writer or be anything in the creative industries. So I went to university. I did the subjects I love, which was French and business. Didn't love business so much, but got my degree, joined the police force in the UK, and I loved it. I had a great career. I did lots of different things. I was a detective. I worked in custody where, you know, we lock people up. I specialized in public order. So I became a riot commander, a public order commander, which is brilliant practice for having kids, turns out. So I did all these great things, and I was really ambitious and driven. And I guess I didn't write much anymore. But I was always really passionate about telling stories, which is kind of what you do in the police. They're true stories. But if you imagine when you're talking to a victim of crime, they don't tell their story in a logical way. You know, they're traumatized. They don't start at the beginning and then give you a middle and then the end. They actually almost always start at the end. And then your job is to kind of pull them back and say, okay, all right, I understand this big thing has happened. Let's talk about how we got there. And now let's talk about how it made you feel and why it might have happened. And so you're kind of pulling out all the different parts of the story, which is really what I do now as a novelist. So it was good training in that respect. And of course, I was talking to people from all walks of life, which was something I wouldn't necessarily have had the experience of if I'd worked in an office or, you know, in a job. But then when my kids were, what were they? 4, 3, and 3. Something really big happened that changed my perspective, I suppose. I've had a pretty difficult time anyway. We'd had fertility treatment to have a set of twins. I've been very, very lucky to have a set of twins. And then one of my twins died when he was a baby. And very, very quickly after that, I fell naturally pregnant with a set of twins. And so I'd had this extraordinary process. In 15 months, I'd had 2 sets of twins. I was grieving. I'd gone back to work and was really pouring everything into work, kind of trying to get my head straight, I suppose. and I had an appraisal for promotion, and it was one of these appraisals. You can stop me if I'm talking too much. It was one of these appraisals where they're called a 360 appraisal. I don't know if you've ever done one. They're hideous. All your colleagues get a questionnaire to fill out about you, and then you get this really kind of brutal report. It's like walking through the canteen naked. It's awful. So I read this report, and it was really good. Like, there were obviously things that, you know, I could work on, but basically it talked about how I was full of energy and always optimistic and creative, and I always listened and I made time for people and like all the good stuff. And I was so smug about it that I took it home to show my husband, and he read it and he said, yeah, this is amazing. This is really good. Who is this woman? I have no idea who this woman is, because I was doing what a lot of people do, and I'm going to say a lot of women do, which is use all the best bits of us for our colleagues and then let our family have the leftovers. And so my husband and my very, very precious 3 children, who I still had after, you know, all we'd been through, I was giving them the grumpy woman, the tired woman, the angry woman, the, you know, haven't got time woman. And it just, it was a proper kind of epiphany. This isn't having it all. I was not having it all. I was sort of doing it all and not very well. And I very, very much support women working in whatever career they want, and having a family. But for me at that moment, it wasn't working. So I took a career break, and I needed to earn money, and it needed to be at home. And if you've ever tried to work from home, you know, there's a limit to what jobs you can do. It's obviously a bit better now that we've all discovered Zoom. But I thought, well, I can write, you know, that's the only thing I know how to do. And I wasn't sitting there thinking, I know what I'll do. I'll write I Let You Go. I'll write a global bestseller and that will make me an author. Not at all. I was thinking, well, I can write website copy, I can write social media copy, I can, you know, I can write descriptions of soap and socks and, you know, whatever I needed to do. And I can write for magazines and newspapers. So I pitched and I created a kind of portfolio career, they would call it, a little itty bitty career of writing different things. So I was doing that. I was home with the kids and writing when they were in bed, when they were napping, when they were in nursery. And it worked. It paid the bills. It wasn't creatively satisfying exactly, but I was writing. And then I wrote I Let You Go. And I wrote I Let You Go, you know, in snatches of time, in between all this other work and in between looking after the kids. And I was incredibly lucky because I Let You Go changed my life and put me on the path to being a full-time author.
I love this story. This is an incredible story. I love that you were a police officer too. You must draw on so much of that for your books from your experience.
I do, but I think people maybe imagine that like I have this kind of, I don't know, this filing cabinet full of real life cases. And every time I have to write a book, I go, which case shall I fictionalize now? And I look through and it's not like that. Mostly, well, for 2 reasons. Partly because I feel quite strongly about not dramatizing someone's trauma. And so although I would pull on things that I might read on the news, I would be very reluctant to take an entire case and create a fictionalized version of it. But also because the honest truth is that real life crime is mostly quite boring.
Right.
And real life criminals are mostly really stupid because that's how they're caught. And what you have in real life generally are crimes that are solved fairly quickly, which, you know, isn't great for a novel, and crimes that are never solved, and that's really bad for a novel. And then occasionally you get the sort of the incredible, intricate, amazing jobs that would be really right for dramatization. But but yeah, most criminals are not the sort of the moustache twirling Machiavellian troublemakers that you have in books and on TV. And I always, when I tell people this, I always think of a guy who I arrested a couple of times. He was always being arrested. He was constantly in and out of, prison, a couple of weeks here, a couple of months there. And he often got arrested in the same way. And this is how it happened. He was a burglar. I don't know if you call them house invasions, do you? Anyway, breaking into people's houses. And what would happen is he would be arrested and interviewed and processed, and he would be bailed to attend court, and he'd be given his bit of paper with, the fact that he's been charged and the date he had to go to court and his name and address on it. And he'd shove it in his pocket and he'd leave the police station, and then he'd go out robbing again, and he'd break into a house and he would leave. He'd drop this sheet of paper at the scene of the crime with his name and address on. So there we go, a very stupid real life burglar.
I can see that. Obviously, you have to be cautious with using actual crimes, but even just the dynamic in the police force, like even if we look at the book and you have the Welsh police and then the English police. So you were part of the English police, is that right? Yeah. So I actually felt like, and I feel bad, but her name, how do I say her name? Fionn.
Yeah.
Okay. Fionn. Leo I got, but Fionn I was a little concerned about.
I know. So I was mean to people with the little bits of Welsh in there, but hopefully you
I loved it. I loved it. I should have listened to the Audible or the audiobook. That always helps, but I did read it. So, but no, I like that. I just can't pronounce it. But yeah, so I was looking at sort of her situation in the Welsh police, and obviously it's a much smaller unit, and because it seemed like she was crossing all sorts of lines that probably would not have been allowed to be crossed.
No. And you know what, I really struggled with this element of being a crime writer when I started. So when I wrote I Let You Go, because I was so close to being a police officer, I'd only just left. And I felt like it was my duty to make everything 100% accurate. And actually, you can't do that. So, for example, when a murder happens in the UK, British police forces will set up a murder incident room, and there would be dozens and dozens of officers working on that, and a senior officer who kind of oversees it and is issuing actions. And all these individual officers will go off and they'll all do a little piece of the investigation. And, they'll do lots of pieces. But you couldn't write a book like that, because we as readers, we want to invest in one or two police officers, don't we? We want to follow them. We want to get to know them. And so if I'd written The Last Party exactly the way it should be in real life, then actually Fionn and Leo would, do bits and pieces, but they wouldn't solve the whole crime, which doesn't really work. So what I've realized as I've got more experienced, I suppose, and I've talked to more readers and I've got a bit of distance from the police, is that story comes first. And what's important is to present a feeling of authenticity, so that this absolutely feels that you're in safe hands as a reader. This is written by an ex-cop, she knows what she's doing, but not at the expense of the story. And that kind of fits with Fionn's character, that I guess, in real life, let's face it, she'd probably get the sack, wouldn't she? I've just finished her book 2 in the series, and she doesn't get the sack, but I have to say she should. So yeah, she's sailing a bit close to the wind, I guess.
So Joanne just has asked if you will say the town that they're all from.
Yes, I won't be mean and ask someone to have a go at it. So they're from Cwm Coed, and Coed means trees and Cwm means valley. So it's kind of like the valley of trees.
Okay. For everybody who just joined, if you want to ask Claire a question live, you're absolutely welcome to. Or if you want to pop your question into the chat window, then I'll make sure that we ask it. And I will go back to all the questions I have. So why did you set the story in Wales? That was a big question I got.
Well, I am an English person and I live in Wales, not too far from the border. And I really wanted to write something set in the place where I live. I'm really interested in the Welsh language. I'm a Welsh learner, so I've been learning Welsh for a few years and I work really hard at it. I'm a long way from fluent. But when we moved here to a Welsh speaking area, so my kids go to a school where all their education is delivered in Welsh. So I have this sort of slightly odd situation where, you know, my kids are bilingual and I'm not. And it makes me feel sometimes like I straddle two different communities. So there was that. There was also the fact that this is my lockdown book. Every author has a lockdown book, at least one. And the way this started, it started in January 2020, I guess, on New Year's Day. And I was standing on the edge of the lake, which is a few minutes walk from my house. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing here is organizing the New Year's Day swim. And that year we had lots and lots of people down by the lake, maybe 100 of us all waiting to go in. And the mist was sitting on the surface of the water and the mountain was looming over us. And everyone around me was saying, this is so beautiful. This is spectacular. You know, aren't we lucky? And I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking, what if a dead body floated through the water now? What would we do? What would people's reactions be? Because this is what it's like to be a crime writer. This is I'm giving you a little insight into what it's like in my head. If you and I go for a nice walk in the woods, you're thinking about how pretty the trees are and the fallen leaves, and I'm wondering how fast a body would decompose given, you know, the damp temperatures. So I was thinking about this body, and we went in for the swim and it was lovely and there were no bodies. Came back home, and as I was warming up, I couldn't stop thinking about this image, this really strong image. And that was very different from how my other books have started, because normally my books start with a kind of a question or a concept. So the book that I'd just finished writing was a book called Hostage, which is set on a 20-hour non-stop flight from London to Sydney. And it's about a flight attendant who's presented with an ultimatum. Does she save the passengers or save her family? So it's quite a kind of a brutal, clear-cut concept to write about. And that's how all my books start. So I kind of know what the story is right from the beginning. This was very different. I didn't have a story at all. I just had a body in a lake. And then we went into lockdown. And borders became really important. I don't know what it was like where you live, whether you had kind of regional laws, but we had Wales and England have they're governed by the British government, but they have devolved health authorities, and so we suddenly had different laws in Wales, and we'd never had this before, and people weren't allowed to cross the border, and the border that had once been sort of invisible now was really, really rigid, and people were getting really angry if they heard an English accent because they shouldn't have been here, and it was all quite tense for quite a long time. And I found this really fascinating, and I suddenly realized that that is what I was going to write about, that this lake was going to sort of be set up in the world that I live in, but I was going to explore what it was like to live right on the border and to feel as though you straddle two worlds.
Oh, wow. I live very close to the American border, so I can relate in a little bit, because that just closed right down, and we have people that like literally just go over it for work and back. So
yeah,
it was a fascinating time. Rita has a question for you, so I'm going to let her ask it live.
Hi, Claire. I really enjoyed the book. I was up till 1 o'clock last night reading it because I was like, okay, what happens? What happens? Lots of characters. And I like that. It was a bit confusing in the beginning, but once I got into it, I was able to keep them straight. What I really loved about your book was how you took a scene and then it was told like 2 or 3 times from different perspectives, the exact same scene. And I don't find that common in writing. So I want to ask you a little bit about that style and how you kept it straight and like did it so well.
Thank you. It was a nightmare to write.
I can imagine.
So I actually stole this a little bit. I stole this. Did any of you watch The Affair? The Affair was, I think it was set in the Hamptons, something like that. And I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched a bit of it, and I loved the way what they did was they shot the same scene from two people's perspectives. And so you would see, for example, a scene where you're seeing it through the guy's perspective, and then later you would see it through a woman's perspective. And it's like everything was different, even the color, even the type of dress that was worn, and it was really, really clever and impactful. So I kind of had that in my mind. The way the structure worked in the book is that I was playing around with themes of reflection, I suppose, which is, you know, an obvious theme when you're talking about lakes and bodies of water. And of course the border, so the opposite sides of the border, Fionn and Leo being kind of, you know, opposite in that they do the same job but very differently. You know, she's a woman, he's a man, he's black, she's white. There are lots of opposites in this book. And what I was really sort of playing with, I suppose, is the way that when you look at your reflection in water, you don't really get back the same thing. It's not like looking in a mirror. It's you know, it might be moving because of the ripples, it's distorted depending on the color of the water. You know, if it's black, you see something different. So I was sort of playing with that. And I also really, really love seeing stories from different people's perspectives, because they're always so different. You know, we all, so if we, obviously we're in a virtual room right now, but if we were in a real life room, and wouldn't that be lovely, especially with a bar, let's have a drink together. So if we're all in this room together and suddenly there's a murder, okay, one of you, I won't pick anyone, but one of you's murdered, sorry. We would all give our statements to the police and we would all have a totally different story. And so some of us might be deliberately lying, like maybe we weren't supposed to be here. Maybe we said we were somewhere else. And so we're trying to cover our tracks. Maybe we're lying because actually we slipped poison in, I don't know, Julie's drink. Didn't really. And then other people would just give a different story because they've got really bad eyesight, or they weren't looking that way, they were looking that way. So we'd all have this different story. And it's not necessarily about being right or wrong. It's just that that's how life works. And so that was what I was playing at with the structure of the book. And yes, it was very, very difficult, not least because every time I made a change, I had to remember that somewhere there would be a sort of a reflection of that. And then I had to think about how that reflection might look differently. And also I had to make sure it wasn't repetitive, because that would be terribly boring to just realize you were, you know, that it shouldn't ever feel like Groundhog Day. It had to feel like something totally different, but just give you enough of the same scene for you to place it.
You did a really good job of it. And is there any possibility it's going to become a book? I mean, a movie or a TV series?
Yes, it's being adapted for TV at the moment. So we're just waiting. We haven't had a green light yet. We're in talks with the network. But I've read the first 2 episodes and they are really good. I'm really excited about some of the changes, because obviously there have to be changes when you put something on TV, but some of them are really cool. There's one character that we've had to lose, which I'm quite sad about, but
who?
Kind of,
or you can't tell.
Well, I didn't see what I don't. Oh, can I tell? No, I probably can't. I probably can't actually. But you know, you can't keep everything.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, the screenwriter is doing a really good job.
Great job.
Thank you.
Sorry, I am muted. Thank you, Rita, for asking live. That's always fun. Lori has a question here. Marianne, you're next, but Lori just wants to know, is there as much animosity between the Welsh and the English in real life as there was in the book?
I don't think so. I feel bad. I feel bad for maybe misrepresenting entire nations. I think you can't ever speak for an entire country, can you? And so all I can speak to is my experience of being an English person living in a Welsh community, which is mostly, I feel, absolutely entirely welcomed and accepted. Sometimes I feel like I'm a fish out of water because I didn't grow up here. It's not the culture that I'm familiar with. I don't know the songs, I don't know the language as well, and there are people here who have lived there for generations, and so they're so rooted and they've got so many connections. There is animosity, that there can be. The English did some terrible things to the Welsh, and I don't know enough. I don't feel I can speak with authority on it, but for example, England did prevent Welsh people from speaking Welsh, so speaking their language. So they were forbidden to speak it in schools, and school children were punished by being made to stand in the corner and wear a placard called the Welsh Knot to show that they'd been punished for speaking Welsh. They were made to speak English. Books had to be in English. So, you can understand, I think, why there's some animosity towards the English now.
I just wanted to point out also that I feel like in this instance, it's not even necessarily the English against the Welsh either. Like there's such a social economical situation happening in your book.
There is, absolutely. And this comes back to what I was just saying about opposites and contrasts, that, yeah, we've got different social classes, different priorities. And also the holiday makers, the kind of we call them weekenders, people with second homes, who cause enormous problems in this part of the world and in other sort of tourist destinations in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in the US and Canada as well. That there are different ways of doing this. If you buy up holiday accommodation that could have been used for local people to get a foot on the property ladder, that's a huge problem. If you only use it 4 times a year and the rest of the time it's empty, that's a big problem. If you use it at the weekend, but you bring all your own food in from the big city and you never support the local shops, that's awful. So I wanted to look at some of those sorts of issues as well, because that crops up in the news here a lot.
Sorry, Marianne, I am coming to you. I just wondered about the Welsh language, because I know when you read something, it's not like phonetically sort of how you would expect it to be. So is it a difficult language to learn?
Do you know what? I didn't find it difficult in the beginning. I sort of do now, I suppose, now that I've got to a slightly higher level where I feel like I need to use more tenses and more grammar. And so there are elements of it that are quite hard. What's good about it is that it's a phonetic language. And so once you know the Welsh alphabet, once you know what the letters are, you can pronounce everything. So it's not like English, where sometimes a word, I can't now think of a single example, but sometimes a word isn't pronounced the way it should. Actually, Welsh is quite straightforward in that respect. I think what I find hard about learning it is that you don't have to speak it. When I used to live in France, and I was fluent very quickly because you have no choice really. French is the only language, whereas here, because the law, because everything is bilingual, so if you go into a shop, they speak Welsh, but they can speak English, and they will speak English, and so it's quite easy, I suppose, to be lazy, and that's what I find hard. But I'm working on it. I'm determined to be fluent.
That makes sense. Sorry, Marianne, I've left you so long. Here we go.
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can, yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Hi. I just loved your book. I think you're so clever. I love the character development, the plot, all the twists and turns, and I'm so happy to hear that there's part 2 that's ready. And I guess the question I had at the end, we had our book club last night, and we were trying to figure out why Fionn put that black plastic bag in the water at the very end. Why?
Well, a couple of reasons. I think she wasn't going to incriminate her mother. She entirely understood why her mother had done it. And the big question, I suppose, is why would you put it in the lake and not like burn it? And the honest answer is it's much more dramatic for a book. If there is the tiniest possibility of it being found at some point. And in all honestly, I don't think it will be. I don't know if it will be. I've got no plans for it to be, but I quite like the idea that it's still there. And at some point I'd quite like the lake to run dry. I don't know, maybe in a few books I can sort of imagine over the course of a book the water level dropping lower and lower and lower, and those people who have followed the series right from the start will remember that black bag and be quite nervous, even if it's never found, that sort of thing, I think.
Wow, that's great. I was thinking too, like with Fionn's character, because she was always, she had a lot of integrity, and it was almost like she loved her mom so much and understood why she did it, so that's why she wouldn't turn her in. But then the thought of like completely burning evidence might have just been too much for her, so she thought just come what may, I'll just throw it in here, and if the dragon wants to spit it out.
I think that is a better answer that I will now use in future.
Okay, because I like the dragon imagery too. It was really neat.
Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, I just loved it. I can't wait to read more.
Thank you so much.
That's so funny. Look, you've just changed how she forever answers that question. Thank you for your questions. If anybody else wants to ask one live, please feel free. Or if you want to pop it in the chat window, then we'll take them. Margaret, this is more of a comment, I believe, than a question, but she says, I love how there was a Jane Austen-like element to talking about class without talking about it, especially when Rachel says, but I bake my own bread.
Yes, there's a kind of, I always laugh a lot at very, very posh people and the things that they think make them respectable. And I think things like baking their own bread. And I think she also says, she says something like, I have a National Trust card. So the National Trust is like a kind of a membership where you go to stately homes, and it's something, it's very, very middle class. So there are these kind of badges of middle class that make me laugh when I hear people say them.
So the next question I have here are, there were so many red herrings in this book. So it was anyone's best guess who had done it. Were there a lot of hints on the way that are like, I must have missed them completely because it made complete sense at the end, but I didn't see it coming at all.
So they're all there. All the clues are there. And this is really important to me when I write a mystery, that you have to be able to solve it. I don't want you to solve it. Like, my absolute ideal is if you solve it maybe 2 pages before I tell you. That's my perfect pacing, or not at all. But the clues have got to be there. And the way I do it, this is going to sound so mad, but this is what I do in my head and on paper, is I think of it like gardening. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm planting seeds and I'm sort of watering those seeds, and then I'm harvesting at the end. Okay, this is what I'm doing. So for example, if I've got a long running red herring that I don't want to conclude until the end, I might mention it in chapter 5, and that's my kind of, I'm planting the seed, and then I might do something else with it. I might mention it again. I might we might see someone wearing red trousers, and red might be the color that I've sort of planted. So that's kind of watering. I'm sort of adding to that clue, and I carry it all the way through. And so when I'm planning my books, I have all these clues, all these kind of links, and every single one has got to be wrapped up by the end. It's got to be either dismissed as a red herring, or it's got to be the actual kind of reveal or a twist. But I won't just throw in clues that don't go anywhere, and I won't ever come out with a reveal or a twist that I haven't properly sewn.
Wow.
I feel like that's my kind of contract with the reader,
That sounds like a lot of work. I think that lends itself well to the next question, which is pantser or plotter.
Pantser or plotter? I never use the term pantser. I don't know why. I've got a bit of a thing about it. I think maybe because it feels quite flippant for something that is a job. But if you're watching this and you don't know why I'm suddenly talking about pants, especially if you're in the UK, where pants obviously mean underpants, it refers to flying by the seat of your pants. So do I plan my books, or do I go with the flow? I plan obsessively. You might have picked this up already. So I will, for Theon 2, which I've just finished, I wrote an outline that was maybe 30,000 words, and the whole book will be 100,000 words. So really extensive chapter breakdown. And that starts off as one paragraph, and then I make it a bit longer, a couple of pages, and then it gets longer and longer, and eventually it becomes a summary of each chapter. And that I really enjoy. And for me, that's kind of the first draft, is a chapter outline. And what that enables me to do is nail the nuts and bolts of it. And I find that a really creative process. This is not dry. I really enjoy doing it. I don't have to think about dialogue. I think a little bit about character arc, but I don't think about, how my characters are getting from A to B, or all the mechanics of what they're doing. I just think about the plot beats, what's happening. I write something that I call the reader's journey, which is me kind of playing God a bit. So in my chapter outline, I'm saying what I want the reader to be thinking at this particular moment. So I will know before I write the book that in chapter 16 or whatever, you're going to suspect this person, you're going to hate that person, and you're going to be rooting for that person. And then maybe 3 chapters on, that's all going to be flipped on its head, and you're suddenly going to realize the person you suspected is actually the person, you're now going to root for. So I will manipulate you in the nicest possible way before I've even put a single word on the page.
It's nice to speak to an author in this genre that is so methodical in their process, because we've spoken to like so many authors, and we've heard it from both sides. So it's really fascinating to hear it from this way. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody who does it quite like that, which lends itself well to Margaret's question here. She said that everyone in our group last night said you were one of the most engaging writers with the most true and complex characters they'd read in a while. We usually don't talk as much about the writing. Do you teach writing classes or workshops?
Thank you, first of all. That's really lovely. I don't teach very often because I see it just seem to be writing all the time, really. I'm teaching at Thriller Fest this year in New York in May, June, which I did last year. I did a masterclass and I loved it so much. I just had 15, I think, students, and we did a really, really deep dive into each of their samples of work. So they'd each submitted a few thousand words. And I got so much out of it, and I think they did too. So I do that sort of thing occasionally, but not very much, no.
Wow. That's cool though, to know. Thriller Fest. I don't even think I've heard of it. All right, here. So we've heard about you. You pretty much answered the question about Christmas Day swim. So that is something that you've actually, you do. Do you do it once a year, or are you a cold plunger?
I am a cold plunger. Yeah,
Cool.
I love it. Absolutely love it. I'm not one of these sort of, triathletes. I'm not interested in swimming distances or fast, or I swim to get my head in the right place and for that exhilaration of being really, 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 really cold. And I guess I swim a little bit for that smug feeling that cold water swimmers have, where they get to go, oh yes, I've been ice swimming this morning.
Rita asks here, what were some of the clues leading to Ellen?
So she, you'll have to forgive me because I wrote this book 3 years ago, the first draft. We have scenes where she talks about Seren and what Seren's been doing at the shore. So for example, in order to get that DNA test, so this obviously is a big spoiler if anyone's watching this on catch up and hasn't read the book, then go read the book. In order to get the DNA test that she gets to prove that her paternity theory, she has to break into Reese's house, right, to get hairs from his hairbrush. And in order to do that, she has to take the keys from Fion's ex-husband, Hugh. And we know that we realize when she's done that because he talks about the keys having gone missing. Fion had a conversation about those keys in front of Ellen. So it is all there, I promise.
Lori has her hand raised. I'm going to let Lori ask her question here.
Hi, yes, I love the book. The book was awesome. The last half, I stayed awake all night finishing it off. So it was really, really good. I do have a question about the ending. What would have happened, Claire, if Fionn would have found out about Ellen's guilt before there was already somebody else arrested for it? How do you think Fionn would have dealt with it then?
Wow. So do you know what? I have done a year of events for the last party and nobody has asked me that. And it's such a brilliant question, Laurie.
Thank you.
Wow, gosh, I just don't know. Like I'd quite like to say that Marianne is spot on, that she does have integrity. Even though she, goes a bit rogue. Would she?
Because she had already wrapped everything up so nicely. And then she found out about the real culprit after the fact. So,
Yeah.
How would that
I don't know. I don't think she would. Do you know? I think it would be. I think the reason this is difficult for me to answer is because Reese is such an odious man. I think if we were talking about, a murder of a straightforward Joe Bloggs who, maybe had sold some drugs or I don't know, done something sort of a bit more standard, then I think Fionn would be much more sort of black and white about things and probably would arrest her mum, because the justification for doing it, I think, is so strong, because what Reese did is so awful, and also because so many people were involved in different ways and everyone wanted him dead. I think the waters are so murky that she uses that maybe as justification for not dobbing in her mother, and it's hard, isn't it? Because of course, if she didn't, if no one else had admitted it, then she would not solve the case. And yet, basically, I don't know. I'm talking around it because I just don't know. I'm not even sure Fionn would know until she was absolutely in that moment.
Thank you.
Good question.
Really good question. Does Marianne have the answer to it?
Maybe. Let's see, Marianne.
Oh,
we can't hear you.
sorry.
There you are. There you are.
Well, that just reminded me with when Ellen, when it turned out that, oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Oh, good. Sorry. Um, you just reminded me because when I was reading about how Ellen put the ricin on a stamp, is it, if Seren had been working for Reese that day, she could have been the one that was poisoned, right?
Yes, she
But
absolutely
it just
could have
happened that, like, that would have been a real tragedy.
been. It would have
Oh
been
boy. So I
horrific.
guess she really, oh yeah, she lucked
But
out.
well, she did. So Seren lucked out. Ellen, of course, had forbidden Seren from going there, and Seren had lied about going there, and wasn't telling Ellen that she was going there, let alone that she was working there. And we know that because
Right.
when Hugh gives her a lift to the party on his speedboat, he says to her something like, oh, I hear you're working for Reese Lloyd, your man wouldn't be too happy about that if she knew. So we're reminded then of the fact that Ellen doesn't know that Seren is spending time at the shore.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it was such a great book. Honest, it was awesome.
All right. So we're going to start to wrap up, but we definitely have some more questions. When I went to your website, I saw that you have a link to join your website. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I run a book club. I mean, it's not the gloss, all right? It's just my little book club. But what you get is me in your inbox once a month, the sort of the early behind the scenes stuff about what I'm working on, and maybe extra material that deleted scenes, those sorts of things. It's kind of like the director's cut. And my book recommendations, things that I love. I have a Facebook group that's sort of attached to the book club, and we read a book together once a month. It's sort of optional, people dip in and out, but it's a really lovely atmosphere. So if you want to find out more about my writing, or you want to chat to me, then you can find all the details on my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And of course, we need to know what is next. Can you tell us anything about the next book, or at least when it's being published?
I can. It's coming out. Well, it's coming out in the UK in the summer. I don't know when it's coming out in Canada and the US yet, and that's partly because I was really late writing it. So my American publishers haven't yet got it, but they will. But I can tell you what the title is, based on the fact that it's actually being released in my newsletter on the 1st of February. But I'm guessing this won't be online before then, will it?
It will be. You better not tell us. It will probably go up. When is the 1st of February? Is that Monday?
Yeah.
No, the 1st of Feb is next Wednesday. Yeah, this will be up before then.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'll just tell you anyway. It's called A Game of Lies, and it is about a reality TV show that's being filmed on the mountains, where all the contestants have dark secrets that they're being threatened with exposure. And so to stay in the game and win the money, they have to keep their secrets. and expose the other contestants. It's full of lies and betrayal. There's a murder. There is, of course, Fionn, and fans of Leo will be glad to know that there's Leo as well.
Okay, I was worried about that. Joanne, do you have one last question for Claire?
Yes. You mentioned that Last Party was being picked up by a network. Do you know which network that is?
We're in talks with a particular network in the UK that
Okay.
I'm not allowed to mention. And if things work out the way that we hope they'll work out, it will be available internationally. But you know, TV's a fickle beast, and I'm trying not to get too excited about it. When I sold my first option for TV, which was for I Let You Go back in 2013, 2014, I practically picked out my red carpet dress like the next day.
Wow.
10 years on, almost 10 years on, we are still waiting to have that made. So I'm a little bit more kind of sanguine now about these things, and if it happens, it'll be amazing. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
Thank you so much. And your book was the highest rated book we've had in a very, very long time. So thank you for that.
That's so lovely. Thank you. I'm so incredibly grateful that that you chose my book, and you know that everyone has taken time to message me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. It's been really, really lovely. If you've got time to leave an online review somewhere, it can be anywhere, it can be Barnes and Noble, a library, Amazon, anywhere at all, it helps such a lot. So I would really appreciate that if you have time.
Very good. Well, thank you, Claire, so much for joining us. Margaret does want to know if she can pre-order your next book yet.
I think so. Yeah, I reckon so, probably. If not, then find my website, sign up to my newsletter, and you'll have that link as soon as it's available.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, everybody, for joining us, for taking time out of your day. And of course, to Claire for spending the last hour with us. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for writing such good books.
Oh, thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.